Our reading this morning is the story Prison to Palace. The story is a faithful retelling of Genesis 39 to 41, as it's found in our children's story Bible, the Peace Table. After his brothers sold him, Joseph was enslaved by Potiphar in Egypt. Joseph worked very hard, but Potiphar's wife told lies about him and had him thrown into prison. God was with Joseph and showed his great love. A servant of the king was also sent to prison. One morning, Joseph saw that the servant was upset because of a dream he had. After helping him understand the dream, Joseph said, "Please remember me when you are set free. Say something to the king so that I can be free too." But the servant forgot. 2 years later, the king of Egypt had two strange dreams. In the first, 7 skinny cows came out of the Nile River and ate 7 fat cows. In the second dream, 7 thin heads of grain swallowed 7 full heads of grain. What did these dreams mean? The king's magicians did not know. The king's servant finally remembered Joseph. He said to the king, "When I was in prison, Joseph told me the meaning of my dream. Maybe he can help you." The king sent for Joseph. After hearing the king's dreams, Joseph said, "The dreams mean that Egypt will have 7 years of plenty of food and then 7 years of a terrible famine when no food will grow. Choose someone wise to oversee the gathering and storage of food during the good years. Then there will be food to eat during the famine." The king saw that Joseph was wise. He put Joseph in charge of the whole land of Egypt and gave Joseph his ring and fine clothes. At 30 years old, it was Joseph's job to get ready for the famine. For 7 years, Joseph gathered and stored grain. The grain was like the sand of the sea, too much to count. Then came 7 years of famine. People were starving. They came from many countries to get food in Egypt. They begged for bread, and Joseph sold them grain. For the still speaking voice of God, we say,
"Thanks be to God." The Peace Table offers us a really wonderful retelling of a portion of the story of Joseph. What we didn't read is that the story of Joseph actually begins several chapters before where our retelling picks up the story and continues on for several more chapters. So, if you hear me reference something that we did not just read in the story of Joseph, know that it is contained within the larger narrative of Joseph, which is, fun fact, one of the largest continuous narratives about the life of a single character that we have in the Old Testament. Fun fact for our day. But as I was reading the story of Joseph, the entire story of Joseph, as well as the contained story that Barb read for us out of the Peace Table, I started thinking about how we spend our time. And I have to be honest, it's not something that I spend a lot of time considering. But I can tell you that in this age of technology, I know that I spend a lot of time on my phone. Perhaps I am not alone in that. And my phone is very generous to me, or perhaps very judgmental to me, and every week, about 10 minutes ago, offers me a weekly report on how I have spent my time on my phone that week. It offers me percentages, values, and all of these wonderful statistics to tell me how many text messages I sent last week, or how many hours I spent playing Spider Solitaire on my phone. Or my very favorite, how many minutes I spent on Pokemon Go. Yes, I know, it's an old game, but I continue to play. Faithfully. And I'll be very honest with you, I do feel rather judged by these statistics on the regular, sometimes even a little bit embarrassed by what my phone is telling me. And here I am, week by week, looking at my phone time and time again with relatively the same statistics. These statistics are how I spend my time. This finite currency that we all get, 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, 366 days in this year, 525,600 minutes a year. But how much time we get, none of us really know. Some of us are gifted with long and full lives, full of quantities of time that at the end someone might say a long and generous life lived. And some of us feel like we don't get enough time. And some of us know folks that we believe didn't get enough time. And so perhaps you will resonate with this sentiment that sometimes I feel quite anxious about this resource, time. We only get so much of it. And because this is a non-renewable resource in a sense, after all, we can't step back and reclaim our yesterday, I often ask myself this week, am I spending my time wisely? Am I living a life without regret? Am I putting every card on the table, so to speak? Am I using this resource well? Sometimes the answer is a resounding yes. When I'm walking during a particularly lovely evening, not like the evenings as of late, but on a particularly cool, wonderful spring evening when I take the time to notice the birds singing and the sun setting and the brightness of the newly unfurled green leaves on the trees, I think, yes, this is time well spent. I have exchanged the currency of my time for noticing the beauty of creation. Or when I look up at the moon, I notice that she is bright and full and practically effervescent in the sky. And I find comfort in my own finitude, and I think, oh, the universe is so much bigger than I am. Thank God. Then maybe I have exchanged my time well. But what about when I spend an hour procrastinating writing my sermon, hypothetically, of course, and I notice that the dishes have not been done and the laundry has not been folded, and I think, well, if the dishes are clean and the laundry is folded, then surely the Holy Spirit will come and fall upon me and give me a fresh word. I'm sure that nobody understands what I am saying. And then all of a sudden, I find myself 3 hours later, the dishes are done, the laundry is folded, but then I spent 2 hours on TikTok. Well then, perhaps I am now feeling a sense of shame about how I've spent my time, exchanging this finite currency for something that I won't get back again, and still a blank page before me. Or perhaps calls for me a time when I spent a transitional time in my employment just last year, and I found myself wondering if I had spent my time well. When relationships that I had for many years unraveled at the drop of a hat, and people that I invested my time in didn't pick up the phone to call me back, I found myself in a place of wondering, did I spend my time well? And these are the things that came to my mind when I thought about this retelling of Joseph and his story. Joseph, who we read several chapters before chapter 39, beloved by his father Jacob. At the time, the only son of his beloved wife Rachel, Joseph was the favorite among his 10 brothers. And Joseph knew that he was the favorite, and his brothers knew he was the favorite. And so the jealousy of his brothers caused them to band together, take Joseph, and throw him in a pit. Side note, we should perhaps never throw our sibling in a pit. But alas, they pull him out of the pit because they begin to feel guilty, and they say, instead of leaving him in the pit to die, we will simply sell him to traders to be enslaved in the land of Egypt. Not better, perhaps. And so they sell their brother Joseph, and then they take his beloved robe. Perhaps you remember Andrew Lloyd Webber's 1990s classic, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dream Coat. They take this robe of Joseph's and they dip it in the blood of a goat, and then they take it to their father and say, our brother has been taken over by wild animals. And so then Joseph goes on this journey, and he ends up in the house of Potiphar, chief guard to the Pharaoh in Egypt. Joseph then goes on from being in Potiphar's house. He is thrown in jail, where our story picks up. Thrown in jail, spends several years in jail, and then ultimately ends up in the house of the Pharaoh. And I would argue this morning, though there are a zillion directions that we can talk about the life of Joseph, that this is a story about how Joseph spent his time. Rather than spending his years in Potiphar's house, or his subsequent years in prison, or his years working under the Pharaoh, rather than spending those years angry with his brothers, or bitter about his circumstances, or embarrassed about his lot in life, Joseph spends his time dedicated to listening to God. Even in the midst of what I think that we can all agree are very miserable circumstances, Joseph chooses to just be faithful and to do the work that is put in front of him. Now, I offer that as a very simple statement that I realize is much more difficult than that, because it is never simple to do the work in front of us. You'll recall the dishes and the laundry before the sermon was written, I believe. It is never easy to simply do the work that is in front of us. Sometimes it's even difficult to see the work that's right in front of us, particularly if the work that's right in front of us has been handed to us because of circumstances that we feel were out of our control. See the pit, and then the enslavement, and then the imprisonment. And sometimes we become so busy that we simply can't see the work that's in front of us. Think 2 hours on TikTok. Or spending our time Googling how to boil the perfect hard-boiled eggs, even though I just did it 2 weeks ago and I read the article then, but I need to go back and reread it because I forgot how to hard-boil the perfect eggs. Or perhaps it's difficult to see the work in front of us because we spend our time wishing we weren't lonely, or because we wish that someone would call us back, or wishing and pining after a life that we didn't get but so desperately wanted. But if the story of Joseph teaches us anything, it is that in the midst of the difficult, trying situations, we still have a choice to make. Because maybe Joseph felt bitterness in his heart. I think I would. Maybe he felt anger. Maybe he felt resentment. Maybe he wished for a life that wasn't his. But still, he chooses to do the simple work before him. To work in Potiphar's house, to care for the prisoners in the jail, to collect the grain during the years of abundant harvest, to prepare for the famine. And out of these acts of faithfulness, when I think it might have been the easier task to carry the heavy chip upon his shoulder and to carry resentment for his brothers and bitterness in his heart, I think a part of Joseph chose to stay gentle and soft. Gentle and soft enough to hear and to be attuned to the voice of God calling him into faithfulness. And perhaps, beloved, that's our invitation today too. Maybe we have a choice too. Despite all the things that have or haven't happened in our lives, perhaps we have an opportunity to make a choice about how we effort and spend our time. And so my prayer for us today is that we choose to spend our time wisely. That when we have a valuable resource, this valuable resource of our time, when we have time to spend with others, I pray that we share it. When we have time to write the extra note of remembrance or to make the extra phone call, I pray that we do it. When we have the extra time to come together as a community and to serve and to give back out of the abundance that has been given to us, I pray that we set that time apart. And perhaps like Joseph, when we make these choices, we will find that our seasons of abundance will spill over into our seasons of famine, and that there would be grace to cover all of the time. May it be so. Amen.